Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. We're going completely cashless, but don't worry, we're not leaving you stranded without any spending power.
Yeah, we're just taking a trip to China through this awesome book, Cashless, China's Digital Currency Revolution.
Think of this as your crash course on how China basically went from cash-heavy to, well, practically cashless in what feels like the blink of an eye.
Seriously, it's mind-blowing how fast it all happened.
Our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to figure out how they did it, what we can learn from it, and what it all means for, well, the rest of us.
Exactly. Get ready for a wild ride, folks. We're diving deep into those super apps you might have heard about: Alipay, WeChat Pay, and we're going to uncover the unexpected hero in all of this.
Oh yeah, QR codes. Who knew those little squares would become such a big deal, right?
Yeah, you wouldn't believe it. Let's start with China's journey to becoming a cashless society.
Okay, let's rewind a bit. How did this whole cashless thing even take off in China? Was it like a government mandate? Everyone had to go digital overnight or something?
Not quite. It's more complicated than that. Think of it this way. In just a few years, major Chinese cities were pretty much cashless. Even street vendors were accepting mobile payments.
Wow, that's crazy fast.
It is. But here's the thing. It wasn't the government forcing it. It was more like a perfect storm.
Ooh, I like that. A perfect storm of what exactly?
Yeah, you had this government actively pushing for digitization, right? But at the same time, you had this incredibly dynamic private sector eager to innovate.
So the government wasn't saying, hey, everyone, use this specific app. It was more like setting the stage and letting innovation play out.
Exactly. They created this fertile ground for competition and addressed the areas where those traditional banks weren't quite cutting it.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about internet privacy? We hear so much about how China handles data differently. Didn't that factor into people's willingness to adopt digital finance?
Well, the book points out that the idea of internet privacy in China is just different.
Different how?
Chinese internet users might not have the same expectations of privacy as we do in the West. It's a different reality.
So privacy concerns might have been there, but they weren't a deal breaker for people.
Yeah, it's kind of like how we accept those long terms and conditions online. Maybe we don't love it, but the convenience wins.
That's a good point.
Okay, so let's talk about these Chinese fintech giants and how they're making waves globally.
Ready for this? Those super apps, Alipay and WeChat Pay, they're not just staying put in China.
Really? I thought they were mostly a China thing.
Nope. They're going global, following the massive wave of Chinese tourists.
Ah, smart move.
Totally. Local businesses, especially in tourist hotspots, they're starting to adopt these platforms just to keep up.
It's like a digital domino effect.
Yeah.
Chinese tourists go somewhere and Alipay and WeChat Pay follow.
Exactly. And it's not just about tourism either. Even Western companies are taking inspiration from Chinese payment apps.
What do you mean? There's this story in the book about a Western bank's innovation team in China. They were shocked that their bank's app didn't have a bill-splitting feature.
Wait, something that basic?
Yeah, which is totally normal in Chinese apps. They ended up creating something similar based on what they saw.
Wow, so made in China isn't just about products anymore. It's also about ideas and features.
And speaking of unexpected influences, are you ready for the real MVP of China's cashless revolution?
I'm on the edge of my seat.
It's the humble QR code.
Seriously, QR codes. I thought those were just like a marketing gimmick.
Nope. In China, they were total game changers. Super simple, cheap, easy to use. This allowed even the smallest vendors to get on board with digital payments.
It's funny how something so basic had such a huge impact, especially compared to NFC, which kind of flopped here.
Right. NFC might be fancy, but it often needs expensive hardware.
Yeah.
Setting it up can be a pain. QR codes, on the other hand, anyone could use them.
Okay, so QR codes, big win for China. But how did those super apps like Alipay and WeChat Pay actually become so dominant? What was their secret sauce?
Well, here's the kicker. They basically bypassed the traditional banking systems.
Whoa, hold on, they went rogue.
Not exactly rogue, but they were smart about it. They used China's existing debit card network and connected directly to users' bank accounts.
So they sidestepped the bank's own digital infrastructure. That's pretty bold.
It was a brilliant move, and it really democratized digital payments. Suddenly, everyone, even people who weren't really served by traditional banks, could participate.
So these super apps, they were like operating in a parallel universe to the banks. I bet the banks weren't too happy about that.
Oh, they definitely weren't. Banks started seeing massive revenue losses, both from those lost transaction fees and from missing out on all that precious customer data.
So it was a double whammy. They lost money and lost access to the data that fuels so much of their business.
Ouch. It was a wake-up call.
Yeah.
And then The government stepped in with regulations that made things even more interesting.
Uh-oh, what did they do?
They required these mobile payment providers to hold all those user funds at the central bank.
So they couldn't just do whatever they wanted with that money anymore.
Exactly. It squeezed their revenue even further because they couldn't earn interest on those funds.
Talk about a power move by the government. It's like they were trying to keep those fintech giants in check while also trying to protect the traditional banking system.
It was definitely a balancing act. But in the midst of all this, something else was brewing that might sound familiar. The rise and fall of P2P lending in China.
Oh, yeah, I remember hearing about that. What went down there?
Well, it was like a wild roller coaster ride. The P2P lending market in China went through this crazy boom, and then it all came crashing down.
Sounds kind of like what happened with the securitization crisis in the U.S., all those bundled loans going bad.
You got it. And just like here, it led to fraud and huge financial losses. The book blames the government's hands-off approach in the beginning and the fact that those provincial regulators weren't ready for this whole new world of P2P lending.
So even though China was embracing the digital revolution, they were still figuring out how to regulate it all, making it up as they went along in a way.
Yeah, it's definitely a learning process for everyone, governments included. But all of this leads us to the main event, the star of the show, China's central bank digital currency, the digital RMB.
That's what we've all been waiting for. Tell us everything.
Okay, so here's the thing. The digital RMB, it's not like those flashy cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin that everyone's talking about. It's digital cash, plain and simple, issued by the central bank, fully controlled by them. No decentralization, no anonymity, just good old digital yuan.
So it's not about disrupting the global financial system, at least not yet. It's more about replacing physical cash and weaving digital payments even deeper into China's existing financial system.
It's a great way to put it. It's an evolution, not a revolution. It builds on what those earlier payment systems created, addressing some limitations, but all within the central bank's control.
Okay, I'm intrigued. The book describes this whole one coin, two repositories, three centers framework for the digital RMB. Mind breaking that down for us?
Sure. So OneCoin is pretty straightforward. It's just the digital version of the yuan, issued as tokens. Imagine them like digital banknotes in your digital wallet.
Okay, that makes sense. What about those two repositories?
That's the central bank and the commercial banks. They're in charge of issuing and distributing this digital currency.
Got it. And the three centers.
Think of them as the brains of the operation. You've got the issuance center, the registration center, which keeps track of everything, and the big data analysis center, which, well, analyzes all that data.
Sounds pretty sophisticated. But what makes this digital RMB different from just using my debit card or a payment app? What's the big deal?
One of the coolest features is offline payments. They use this loose coupling of tokens, which basically means you can make transactions even without an internet connection.
Whoa, that's a game changer. Think about rural areas where internet access can be spotty.
Exactly. It makes it accessible to everyone. Plus, it leverages this UTXO technology, kind of like Bitcoin, but without all the complicated blockchain stuff. It makes transactions super fast, even with tons of people using it at the same time.
So faster, more efficient, and accessible even offline. That's impressive. But let's be real. All this digital stuff makes me a little uneasy about privacy. Doesn't this give the government even more control over people's finances?
Well, yeah, the centralized nature of the system means they can track everything. The registration center knows who owns what and where every single token goes. It's like a super detailed record of every transaction.
So the government has a bird's eye view of the entire system. That's a lot of power. What about the big data analysis center? What's its role?
Think of it like the detective. It analyzes all that transaction data to spot fraud, identify trends, and even inform economic policies.
So it's not just about replacing cash, it's about giving the government a level of control and insight into the flow of money that's never been possible before.
That's a key point.
Yeah.
But what about those super apps we talked about? Alipay and WeChat Pay. What happens to them with the digital RMB coming in?
Yeah. Are they going to get pushed out?
It's a tough question. The digital RMB will definitely compete with them, but I don't think they'll just disappear.
Wow.
Alipay and WeChat Pay have become way more than payment apps. They're like these all-in-one ecosystems for everything from messaging and shopping to investing in hailing rides.
They're basically part of daily life for many people.
Exactly. They've created these super sticky platforms that are really hard for banks to compete with. The banks are trying to catch up, though. They're launching their own digital-only banks and partnering with tech companies, but it's an uphill battle.
So it's like this epic showdown between banks trying to reclaim their dominance and these super apps that just keep expanding.
It's a fascinating battle to watch. And the digital RMB is a powerful new weapon in this fight. But it's still early days. It's anyone's guess who will come out on top.
It's a good reminder that this whole digital shift isn't just happening in China. It's a global phenomenon that's shaking things up everywhere. As we dig deeper into cashless, we'll explore the impact of the digital RMB on lending, financial inclusion, and its ambitions to go global. We'll also talk about the potential risks and challenges that come with all this new tech. Stay tuned.
You know, one of the most fascinating things about this digital shift in China is how it's changing lending. Forget those old credit scores. They're using these alternative methods based on real-time data.
So it's not just about your payment history anymore. They're looking at everything, like your online shopping habits, your social media activity, your spending patterns, basically, your entire digital footprint.
Exactly. They're building these super detailed profiles of borrowers, going way beyond just whether you can repay a loan.
It's kind of like those social credit scores we hear about, but for your finances. It makes you wonder, could your online activity actually prevent you from getting a loan?
It's a valid concern for sure. The book even talks about the potential for privacy violations and, even abuse with this kind of system. But there's another side to this coin.
Okay, what's the upside?
It's actually having a positive impact on financial inclusion, especially for people who've been excluded from traditional banking.
So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. On one hand, it could level the playing field, but on the other, it raises some big questions about privacy and fairness. It feels like we're entering this new world of finance where data is the most valuable currency.
And China is definitely leading the charge in this data-driven finance revolution. The book highlights these digital lenders like MyBank and WeBank. They're backed by those tech giants we talked about, and they're using their massive data pools and tech expertise to make lending faster, more efficient, and more accessible.
It's almost like these tech companies are the new banks, but with a totally different playbook. They're not held back by those old systems or ways of thinking.
And it's not just about profits for them either. Take MyBank, for instance. Their stated goal is to offer credit to 70% of small and micro businesses in China. The ones that traditional banks often overlook.
That's a huge number. It really shows how digital payments have changed the game for financial inclusion, especially in rural areas. The book talks about how people used to travel for hours to reach a bank, and now they can manage everything from their phones.
It's empowering. And it's not just limited to China. Ant Group, the company behind Alipay, is working with international organizations to bring digital inclusion to Africa, sharing their tech and know-how with regions where lots of people don't have bank accounts.
That's amazing. It's like this ripple effect of innovation starting in one place and spreading outward. Okay, let's shift gears now and talk about the digital yuan's global aspirations. The book claims that China wants to challenge the US dollar with its digital currency. Is that even possible?
It's a long shot, for sure. But China is making moves to internationalize the digital RMB. They're starting with the Greater Bay Area, which includes Hong Kong and Macau.
Makes sense. Start close to home.
Right, and they're targeting those countries involved in the Belt and Road Initiative, that massive infrastructure project that spans across Asia, Africa, and Europe. It's all very strategic.
So they're leveraging their economic power and those strategic partnerships to create a network of countries using and accepting the digital RMB.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're offering some sweet deals to encourage adoption, like better exchange rates and access to digital trade platforms. China's building these platforms, powered by blockchain, to make trade smoother and reduce reliance on traditional systems like SWIFT.
So it's not just about launching a digital currency, it's about creating a whole ecosystem around it.
You got it. The digital RMB is a tool for China to boost its influence on the world stage.
Speaking of global impact, the book also mentions concerns about China using its CBDC to get around sanctions, which I'm sure has Western governments a bit on edge. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a legitimate concern. But the book suggests that China will probably be cautious in this area. They don't want to risk jeopardizing the adoption of the digital RMB by rocking the boat too much.
It's a delicate balancing act. Promote the digital yuan, but don't alienate the international community.
Precisely. Plus, China already has other ways to trade with sanctioned countries if they want to. The digital RMB isn't essential for that.
It seems like the digital RMB is making an already complex world of international finance even more complicated. But the book argues that this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to central bank digital currencies. We're witnessing a global shift, right?
Absolutely. The book mentions that several other countries are launching or at least experimenting with CBDCs. There's a growing global interest in this tech, and it's driven by multiple factors: the decline of cash, the rise of digital payments, and the desire for more control and efficiency in finance.
The Chinese experience, while unique, offers some valuable insights for everyone as we all figure out this uncharted territory. It's clear that CBDCs can be transformative, but they also come with challenges and risks we need to consider. Before we wrap things up, I want to touch on one more thing the book dives into: privacy. We talked about how those expectations of privacy might be different in China. But as CBDCs become more widespread, what does this mean for privacy in other parts of the world?
That's the million-dollar question. And the book doesn't shy away from it. It acknowledges that CBDCs could lead to more government surveillance since they can track every single transaction. It raises some serious concerns about the erosion of financial privacy.
So, even in countries with strong privacy laws, could the introduction of a CBDC shift the balance of power, giving governments way more insight into their citizens' financial activities?
It's a possibility we have to consider. The book emphasizes that how these CBDCs are designed and implemented will be crucial in determining how much privacy they protect.
So, it's not just about the tech itself, it's about the rules and regulations that govern its use.
Exactly. We need to have open and honest conversations about those trade-offs: convenience, security, privacy, as we move toward a more digital financial world. The Chinese experience, with its focus on control, shows us how different approaches can play out. It's a good reminder that we have choices to make.
It makes you realize that technology isn't neutral. It reflects the values and priorities of the people who create and use it. As we wrap up this deep dive into cashless, it's clear that we're at a crossroads. The decisions we make about digital currencies today will have a huge impact on the future of finance and our own financial lives. So where does this leave all of us? I mean, we've covered a lot of ground here, from QR codes to super apps to the digital yuan's global
It's
ambitions.
definitely been a whirlwind tour of China's cashless revolution.
It feels like the way we think about money, banks, even privacy is changing right in front of us. China might not be the perfect model, but it's definitely given us a glimpse into what the future could hold.
It's a fascinating case study for sure.
So the big question is, what role do WE want these digital currencies to play in our lives?
That's the key, right? What are our priorities?
Yeah, I mean, do we go for convenience and efficiency, even if it means giving up some control over our data? Or do we prioritize privacy, even if it means sticking with systems that might not be as advanced or user-friendly?
It's a tough balancing act. There are no easy answers.
It makes you think, how comfortable are we with the idea of every single transaction being tracked and analyzed? Where do we draw the line?
It's a conversation we need to have as a society. The Chinese model, with its emphasis on control and traceability, is a stark contrast to what some Western countries are exploring, where privacy is a bigger concern. It highlights the different paths we can take.
This deep dive into cashless has really made me rethink the future of finance. It's exciting, but also a bit unnerving, full of possibilities, but also potential pitfalls.
Yeah, I get that. The future's uncertain, but that's what makes it so interesting, right?
Exactly. It's not set in stone. We have a say in shaping it.
And that's what's so great about this book. It doesn't just give us facts, it makes us think critically. It challenges our assumptions and encourages us to imagine different possibilities.
So as we wrap things up, what's the one thing you want our listeners to walk away with?
I'd say don't be a passive bystander in all of this. Get involved, learn about the different digital currencies being developed, the technology behind them, the potential impact they can have. Ask yourself, what kind of financial future do you want to be a part of?
That's great advice. We can't just ignore this digital revolution. It's happening whether we like it or not. And the choices we make today will shape the financial landscape for years to come. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into cashless. We hope you learned something new and maybe even got a little inspired to keep exploring these topics. And who knows, maybe you'll even discover a whole new passion for the future of finance. That's what the deep dive is all about.